When I woke up that morning, everything felt wrong. My body was heavy, like a weight had been placed on my chest, pressing down on my heart. My thoughts were loud and disjointed, like a chaotic storm raging in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling of regret, deep, piercing regret that clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. I stumbled to the corner of the room where a small mirror hung, cracked at the edges, and looked at myself. My reflection stared back at me, unfamiliar and haunting. My eyes were red from crying, my lips trembled as if they could no longer form words. And then, I whispered to myself, I've ruined everything. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down my cheeks as I slumped to the floor, clutching my journal like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My hands trembled as I opened it, flipping to a blank page. I had to let it out, I had to put into words the pain and confusion tearing me apart. With shaky fingers, I began to write, how did I let myself lose everything I held dear? Where did it all go so wrong? Let me take you back to where it all began. That's when the memories started flooding back, memories of home, of the values I cherished, of the journey that brought me to this point. I didn't know it then, but that journey would change my life forever. Welcome to House of African Native Tales, where stories come alive with lessons, emotions, and the richness of our culture. Here, we share captivating narratives that resonate deeply, inspiring reflection and growth. Today's story is one you won't want to miss, a tale of choices, betrayal, and the journey to redemption. If you're ready for a story that will leave you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Now, sit back, relax, and let the power of storytelling take you on a journey. My life in Lagos was simple, structured, and safe. My parents raised me to know right from wrong, to walk in the way of the Lord, and to never compromise my values. They weren't just my parents, they were my role models, respected by everyone in our church and community. My father's words were like commandments, your purity is your strength. It's a gift you must preserve, not for anyone else, but for yourself and God. My mother would always remind me, Bimbo, don't let the world distract you from what matters. The world will tempt you, but you're stronger than that. I held on to those words through thick and thin, especially during my university years. Oh, how they tested me there. Friends would tease me, laugh at me, and call me names, old school, too religious, boring. They couldn't understand why I wasn't interested in parties, boyfriends, or the so-called fun they lived for. But I didn't care. I wore my purity like a badge of honor, proud of who I was and what I stood for. Looking back, I wonder if I was too confident, too sure of myself. Maybe that's why leaving Lagos felt like stepping into the unknown. When I received my NYSC posting to Ekiti State, a mix of emotions consumed me. Excitement, I was finally stepping into a new phase of life. Fear, what would life be like outside my comfort zone? And apprehension, could I hold on to my values in a world so different from the one I'd known? As I packed my bags, my parents hugged me tightly, their pride evident in their eyes. My mother whispered, remember, Bimbo, you carry our love and faith with you wherever you go. I smiled and nodded, promising myself I wouldn't let them down. I was determined to stay true to the person they had raised me to be. But little did I know, the journey ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. Ekiti State was nothing like Lagos. The air was quieter, heavier, as if the pace of life itself had slowed down. Camp was buzzing with activity, a mix of excitement and chaos as hundreds of us adjusted to our new reality. I remember the first day like it was yesterday. The hostels were cramped, the beds lined up like sardines in a can. The air smelled of dust and sweat, and the voices of strangers filled every corner. It was overwhelming, but I told myself this was part of the experience. That's when I met Chinaza. She was assigned to the bunk next to mine, and from the moment she spoke, I knew she was different. Chinaza was bold, confident, and outspoken, with a sharpness in her tone that felt like a warning. "So, you're from Lagos?" she asked, sizing me up. "You must think you're better than the rest of us." I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. "No, I'm just here to serve, like everyone else." Her eyes narrowed slightly before she smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see about that," she said, turning away. It wasn't long before her teasing started. "You mean you've never had a boyfriend?" she asked one night, her tone half teasing, half shocked. "Wow, Lagos girls aren't what I thought they'd be." Her laughter echoed faintly, sharp and cutting. I tried to laugh it off, but her words stayed with me, planting seeds of doubt I couldn't shake. Then there was Depo. I first noticed him during the morning drills, tall, charming, and full of life. He had a way of making everyone laugh, and when he spoke to me for the first time, I couldn't help but smile. "You're Bimbo, right?" "The Lagos girl," he said, his tone playful. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Oh, I knew it," he said with a grin. "You carry yourself differently. Like someone who knows where she's going." His words caught me off guard. They felt genuine, but they also made me uncomfortable. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. Over the next few days, Depo seemed to always be around, during meals, at the morning drills, even during our evening socials. He was charming, funny, and persistent, and though I tried to keep my distance, there was something about him that was hard to ignore. And Chinaza noticed. She always noticed everything. "Depo likes you," she said with a smirk. "You should give him a chance. Who knows? He might be the one." I laughed it off, but her words persisted. Was I missing out on something? Was there more to life than the rules I had followed so diligently? Those questions began to swirl in my mind, questions that would soon lead me down a path I never thought I'd take. Chinaza had this way of speaking that made you question everything you thought you knew. Her voice was sharp, her words laced with both mockery and a strange allure, like a dare you weren't sure you should take. "Bimbo, you're too rigid," she said one evening as we sat on our bunks, her voice casual but pointed. "You act like life is some big test, like you're waiting for someone to grade you. Don't you get tired of it?" I smiled politely, hoping the conversation would end there, but Chinaza wasn't one to back down. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to just let go? To live for yourself, not for your parents or your church or whoever else is holding you back?" Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I tried to laugh it off, brushing her comments aside with the same excuses I always used. "It's not like that," I said. "I just have my principles, that's all." But she wasn't convinced, and neither, it seemed, was I. That night, as the camp grew quiet, I found myself sitting alone with my thoughts. I picked up a pen and began to write a letter to my mother. Writing had always been my way of sorting through emotions, of untangling the mess in my mind. "Dear Mama," I wrote, the words flowing easily at first. "Camp is going well. The drills are exhausting, but I'm managing. I miss you and Papa more than I can say." But then, I paused. My pen hovered over the page as I debated what to write next. Should I tell her about Chinaza? About the questions she'd stirred in me, the doubts that were beginning to creep into my mind? I wanted to. I wanted to pour it all out, to let her know how hard it was to hold on to the values they'd raised me with, how lonely it felt to be the one person who didn't fit in. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to worry her, didn't want her to think I was struggling. So instead, I finished the letter with a lie. "I'm doing fine," I wrote. "Everything is fine." But everything wasn't fine. I began to notice the other girls in camp, the way they laughed freely, the way they seemed to embrace life without hesitation. They talked about their past relationships, their adventures, their mistakes, and they carried it all with a sense of pride I couldn't understand. I started to wonder, had I been too rigid? Had I spent so much time trying to be perfect that I'd missed out on living? Chinoza's words echoed in my mind, feeding the envy I felt but refused to admit. I told myself I was just observing, just curious. But deep down, I knew I was questioning everything I'd ever believed. And then there was Dapo. He seemed to appear wherever I went, his presence like a constant pull I couldn't escape. He had this way of speaking that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. "Bimbo," he said one afternoon as we walked back from the parade ground, his voice warm and full of charm, "You're different. There's something about you, this grace, this strength. It's rare, you know." I wanted to dismiss his words, to pretend they didn't affect me. But they did. They made me feel seen, admired, special in a way I hadn't felt before. "I'm not like that," I said softly, trying to downplay his compliments. "You are," he insisted, his eyes locking onto mine. "And I like that about you." His persistence was disarming. Every time I tried to push him away, he found a way to draw me back in. And Chinoza noticed. "Dapo really likes you," she said one evening, her voice dripping with amusement. "You should stop being so uptight and give him a chance. Honestly, what's the harm?" Her words felt heavy, and for the first time, I didn't have a response. What was the harm? Wasn't it normal to let someone care about you? But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when something about Dapo didn't feel right. He avoided talking about his past, brushing off my questions with a quick laugh or a vague answer. "Why do you need to know about that?" he'd say, flashing his easy smile. "Let's focus on now, okay?" And then there was Chinoza. I caught her whispering with Dapo more than once, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. When I asked her about it, she waved me off. "We are just talking," she said, her tone light but her smile unreadable. "Don't overthink it." But I was overthinking it. There was something about the way they interacted that didn't sit well with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made me uneasy. Still, I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, Chinoza was my friend, wasn't she? In the end, I gave in. Chinoza's words, Dapo's persistence, and my own growing doubts about my values all came together, wearing me down until I could no longer resist. "Okay," I told Dapo one evening, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can try this." His smile was instant and dazzling, like he'd just won a prize. "You won't regret it," he said, his voice full of promise. From that moment, Dapo was relentless in his affection. He brought me small gifts, a packet of biscuits, a handwritten note telling me how much he admired me. He made me feel cherished, adored, like I was the most important person in his world. At night, I would sit with my journal, trying to make sense of my emotions. "It's harmless," I wrote one evening. "There's nothing wrong with letting someone care about me, is there? Maybe I've been too hard on myself. Maybe this is what it means to live." I wanted to believe those words. I wanted to believe that I wasn't compromising, that I was just exploring a new side of life. But deep down, a part of me knew I was crossing a line I'd sworn never to approach. I told myself it was fine, that I was still in control. But looking back, I realized that was the moment everything began to change. The campfire was supposed to be a night of laughter, bonding, and memories, a moment to forget the rigid routines of camp life. The air was alive with excitement, music, and the rhythmic clapping of people letting loose. Laughter echoed through the night, a contagious energy that pulled everyone into its fold. Chinoza, of course, was in her element. She had a drink in hand, a mischievous smile on her face, and a knack for drawing people into her orbit. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling with something that felt both inviting and dangerous. "Bimbo, you've been sitting there all night like some statue," she teased, holding out a cup toward me. "It's time to stop acting like a choir girl and join the fun. Just one sip. It's harmless." I shook my head, trying to resist, but my resolve wavered under her persistent gaze. "I don't drink," I said, my voice weak even to my own ears. "And tonight, you'll start," she shot back, her tone playful yet firm. "Don't tell me you're afraid of one tiny sip." Before I could respond, Depo appeared beside her, his ever-present charm radiating as he looked at me. "She's right, Bimbo," he said softly. "It's just one drink. What's the worst that could happen? Trust me. Trust me." Two simple words that broke through my defenses. For weeks, I'd felt the weight of being the odd one out, the girl with the unshakable rules. Was it really so bad to let go, just for one night? Everyone else seemed to be having the time of their lives. Why couldn't I? I hesitated, then reached for the cup. The liquid burned my throat as I swallowed, and Chinoza let out a triumphant laugh. "See? That wasn't so hard." But it wasn't just one sip. Another cup found its way into my hand, and then another. Each one chipped away at the voice in my head telling me to stop. The world around me blurred, the music and laughter growing louder, more intoxicating than the drink itself. Depo stayed close, his voice soothing, his touch light on my arm as he guided me away from the circle. "Let's get some fresh air," he said. I followed him without question, my mind too clouded to think clearly. The noise of the campfire faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet rustle of the trees and the hum of the night. I felt unsteady, unsure of my surroundings, but Depo's presence was grounding, comforting in a way that made me let my guard down. What happened next is a blur, fragments of sensations, fleeting emotions I couldn't piece together. All I know is that I crossed a line I never thought I would. In that moment, I gave in, and the weight of that decision wouldn't hit me until the morning. When I woke up the next morning, everything felt wrong. My head pounded, my body felt heavy, and a dull ache sat deep in my chest. But worse than the physical pain was the sinking feeling in my heart, the undeniable knowledge that something had changed, that I had crossed a boundary I could never return from. Fragments of the night before played in my mind like a broken record, Chinoza's laughter, Depo's voice, his touch. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if I could block it all out, but the memories refused to be silenced. How could I let this happen? How could I have been so weak? Shame washed over me in waves, relentless and unforgiving. I thought of my parents, of the values they'd instilled in me, of the promises I'd made to myself. I had failed them. I had failed myself. The days that followed were a blur of avoidance. I couldn't face Chinoza, and I certainly couldn't face Depo. Every time I saw him, I felt my stomach churn, a mix of anger, shame, and something I couldn't name. I told myself he had taken advantage of me, but deep down, I knew I'd made a choice, a terrible, irreversible choice. Depo didn't give up. He tried to talk to me, to explain, but I avoided him at every turn. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuses he had, wasn't ready to confront the reality of what had happened. It was days later when he finally cornered me, his face solemn, his usual charm replaced by something darker. "Bimbo," he said, his voice heavy. "Please, let me talk to you." I didn't want to listen, but something in his tone made me stop. He looked, different. Nervous. I should have told you earlier, he began, his words slow and deliberate. But I was scared. I didn't know how to say it. My chest tightened as I stared at him, my heart pounding. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew it wasn't good. "I'm HIV positive," he said, the words falling like a hammer, shattering the fragile sense of control I had left. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air seemed to vanish from the room, replaced by a deafening silence. His words echoed in my mind, over and over again, until they were all I could hear. "I didn't want to lose you," he continued, his voice trembling. I thought if I told you, you'd push me away." I stared at him, my tears falling freely now. "You thought lying to me was better," I said, my voice breaking. "You thought I didn't deserve to know?" He tried to explain, to justify, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The weight of his confession crushed me, leaving me broken and breathless. My world had already crumbled, but now it felt like it had been obliterated entirely. The shame, the regret, the fear, it was too much to bear. As I walked away from him, my tears blurred my vision, my heart heavy with the knowledge that my life would never be the same again. I had avoided Chinoza for days. I couldn't bear to look at her, knowing the part she played in pushing me toward the worst decision of my life. But the weight of everything, the regret, the betrayal, the shame, finally became too much to carry alone. I needed answers. I needed her to understand what she'd done to me. When I found her sitting on her bunk, casually scrolling through her phone as if the world hadn't crumbled around me, I felt anger rise in my chest like a storm I couldn't contain. "Chinoza," I said, my voice trembling but firm. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Oh, Bimbo," she said, setting her phone down with an almost lazy grace. Finally decided to come out of hiding. Her nonchalance infuriated me. How could she act so casually when she had played such a significant role in my downfall? "Why did you do it?" I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. "Why did you push me to drink that night? Why did you encourage me to trust him? You knew what would happen." She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" she said, her tone cold and dismissive. "You're a grown woman, Bimbo. You made your own choices. Don't try to pin this on me." Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to back down. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I shot back. "You kept pushing and pushing, making me feel like I was missing out, like I wasn't enough. You encouraged him to pursue me, to break me down until I gave in. Why, Chinoza? Why would you do that to me?" For a moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes darkened, her lips tightening as if she were debating whether to speak. And then, with a bitter laugh, she answered. "Why?" she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "Because I'm sick of you pretending to be perfect. You and your holier-than-thou attitude, walking around like you're better than everyone else. Do you know how exhausting it is to be around someone like you? Someone who always gets it right, who always has the perfect family, the perfect life." Her words stunned me into silence. I had never thought of myself that way. I had never imagined that someone like Chinoza could see me as anything more than just me. "You don't even remember, do you?" she continued, her voice rising. "Years ago, my family used to go to your church. My parents used to talk about your family like you were saints. Why can't we be like the Adegbites? They'd say. Why can't you be more like Bimbo? Do you know what it's like to grow up in someone's shadow? To always feel like you'll never measure up?" I stared at her, her words cutting deeper than I thought possible. "So, this was about revenge?" I asked quietly. She smirked, the bitterness in her eyes unmistakable. "Call it whatever you want, she said. You needed to be brought down a peg. Turns out, you're not so perfect after all. Her words solidified something inside me, an understanding that no apology, no explanation would ever undo the pain she had caused. I had trusted her, and she had used that trust to destroy me. You didn't just hurt me, Chinaza, I said, my voice trembling with anger and sorrow. You broke something inside me. And for what? To prove a point. She shrugged, her cold dismissal cutting deeper than any insult could. What's done is done, Bimbo. Get over it. And with that, she turned back to her phone, her indifference a final blow to whatever shred of friendship I thought we'd had. I didn't think Depo could surprise me anymore. After everything he had done, after the revelation that shattered my world, I thought I had seen every side of him. But when he approached me that evening, his face pale and his eyes heavy with guilt, I realized there was more to the story, more than I was prepared to hear. Bimbo, he began, his voice quiet, almost pleading. I need to talk to you. I'm sorry, he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear I didn't. But there's something you need to know. I crossed my arms, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. What could you possibly say that would make any of this better, Depo? He looked down, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his guilt. It was Chinaza, he admitted. She orchestrated everything. She came to me before camp even started, told me about you, told me how perfect you were. She said you needed to be taught a lesson, that you needed to know what it's like to fall. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, what? I said, my voice shaking. You just went along with it? You used me to settle her grudge. I didn't know how far it would go, he said, his voice cracking. At first, it was just harmless flirting, but then I started to like you. Really like you. But by then, it was too late. I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him feel the pain he had caused me. But all I could do was stand there, my heart breaking all over again. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice barely a whisper. I'll go to the camp authorities. I'll tell them what Chinaza did. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But his words felt hollow, too little too late. The damage had already been done, and no confession, no apology could undo it. You can't make this right, Depo, I said, my voice cold and distant. You and Chinaza both took something from me that I can never get back. He looked at me, his guilt written all over his face, but I didn't stay to hear more. I turned and walked away, leaving him behind with his remorse and my shattered trust. As I walked, I realized something, the people I had trusted most had betrayed me in the worst ways. And yet, I was still standing. Broken, but standing. And somehow, that felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. In the days that followed, I disappeared into myself. I avoided everyone, their voices, their glances, their questions. The guilt and shame felt unbearable, weighing me down like an anchor pulling me into an endless ocean of regret. I questioned everything. My faith. My choices. My worth. Who was I now? What was left of me? I stopped attending group activities and spent most of my time alone, replaying the events that had led me here. How had I allowed myself to fall so far? My thoughts were unrelenting, a constant reminder of how much I had lost. But in my solitude, something small but significant began to stir. I reached for my journal, the one thing that had always been a source of clarity for me. I wrote down everything, the pain, the fear, the anger. Each word felt like a weight being lifted, a small step toward understanding myself again. Then, one day, I made a decision. I couldn't let my mistakes define me. I couldn't let the actions of others dictate the rest of my life. I had to face what had happened, no matter how difficult it was. I went to the camp clinic to seek medical advice about my exposure to HIV. The fear of hearing the truth was overwhelming, but I knew it was something I couldn't avoid. The staff were kind and professional, guiding me through the process with compassion. I left the clinic with a mix of hope and dread, but at least I had taken the first step. I also began attending counseling sessions. Talking to someone who wasn't there to judge me, someone who could listen without bias, was a lifeline I didn't realize I needed. Through counseling, I started to confront the choices I had made, not with self-loathing, but with a determination to learn from them. I also found myself praying again, not the desperate, guilt-ridden prayers I'd muttered in the aftermath of everything, but honest conversations with God. I told Him about my pain, my fears, and my hope for something better. Slowly, I began to understand that faith wasn't about being perfect, it was about finding strength in imperfection. My prayers weren't about asking for forgiveness anymore, they were about finding the courage to forgive myself. Each day felt like a small victory. I was still broken, but I was rebuilding. And with each passing moment, I started to see glimpses of the person I wanted to become. It wasn't long before the truth about Chinoza came to light. Word spread quickly through the camp, rumors, whispers, and eventually open conversations about what she had done. Depo's confession to the camp authorities had exposed everything, her manipulation, her grudge, her role in orchestrating my downfall. People began to turn on her, their admiration for her boldness replaced by disdain. The same confidence she had wielded like a weapon now felt hollow, a facade stripped bare for everyone to see. She became a pariah, avoided and ignored by the very people she had once charmed. The camp officials summoned her for questioning, and though the specifics of their decision weren't shared with us, it was clear that she faced consequences. Chinoza, who had always been so vibrant and commanding, now walked the campgrounds with her head down, her energy subdued. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. Watching her unravel was a sobering reminder of how bitterness and jealousy could destroy not just others, but oneself. Chinoza had lost more than the trust of those around her, she had lost herself in her need to bring me down. I didn't speak to her again, not out of anger, but because I knew there was nothing left to say. Her downfall wasn't mine to celebrate, it was hers to reconcile with. Depo came to me one final time, his face solemn but sincere. He apologized again, not just for what he had done, but for the pain he had caused. His words felt genuine, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe them. "I'm sorry, Bimbo," he said. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I'd been stronger." I looked at him, my heart heavy but no longer angry. "I forgive you, Depo," I said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. Our paths are different now." He nodded, understanding, and that was the last time we spoke. From that moment, I decided I couldn't let this chapter of my life define me. I began to think about the future, not with dread, but with purpose. I thought about the lessons I had learned, the strength I had found in the midst of my pain. And I realized I could use my story to help others. I started writing again, not just for myself, but for those who might one day need to hear my voice. I wanted to talk about the importance of HIV awareness, about the dangers of manipulation and emotional abuse, about the power of resilience. My pain became my purpose, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As I sat by the window one evening, my journal open on my lap, I wrote the words that summed up my journey. "Mistakes don't define us. How we rise after them does." This isn't the end of my story, it's the beginning of a stronger, wiser me. And for the first time, I believed it. And that's my story, one of pain, redemption, and growth. Life may knock us down, but it's how we rise that truly defines us. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you something to reflect on or inspired you in any way, please let me know in the comments. Here at House of African Native Tales, we believe in sharing stories that touch hearts, provoke thought, and celebrate the richness of our experiences. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories rooted in African culture and human resilience. Thank you for watching, and remember, every tale holds a lesson, and every lesson makes us stronger.